Hey guys, today I wanted to talk about how you can make a refugee claim here in Canada and the things you'll need to make it a successful claim. I want to put a disclaimer out. I am not a refugee lawyer and I am not an immigration consultant. I will definitely be sharing information on where and how you can get a refugee lawyer or immigration consultant, but I am not professionally certified in refugee law. All I'm sharing is from my own experience of going through the refugee process and the information in the Refugee Lawyer Practice Manual, which is available for free on the Legal Aid Ontario website. Okay, so let's get started. So first, let's talk about your right to make a refugee claim. According to the Refugee Convention, anyone who is facing persecution in their home country because of race, nationality, ethnic group, religion, political ideas, sexual orientation, or membership in a particular social group has the right to make a refugee claim. You also have the right to make a refugee claim if you're fleeing armed conflict. However, in Canada, there are some legal policies that can exclude you from making a refugee claim. So you can make a refugee claim except if you are under a removal order, you can't make a refugee claim. If you're already recognized as a convention refugee by another country that you can return to, you can't make a refugee claim. If you have already been granted protected person status in Canada, you can't make a claim, obviously, because why would you? You're already good to stay and live in Canada. If you arrived in Canada via the Canadian-US border because of the Safe Third Country Agreement, but more on this later, and there are exceptions to this rule. You can't make a refugee claim if you are not admissible to Canada on security grounds or because of criminal activity or human rights violations. You can't make a refugee claim if you made a previous refugee claim that was found ineligible. More on this later. You can't make a refugee claim if you made a previous claim that was rejected by the Immigration and Refugee Board. And finally, you can't make a refugee claim if you abandoned or withdrew a previous refugee claim. So what makes a valid and successful refugee claim? A refugee claim is successful if you can show and prove that you are a member of a particular group in your home country that experiences persecution. So what is persecution? According to the Immigration and Refugee Board, persecution must be serious mistreatment. So what do they mean by serious? Well, this is any action that denies human dignity in key ways where core human rights are being violated. A great rule of thumb is any threat to life, liberty, or limb. So any threat to your life, meaning you could be killed, any threats to your liberty, meaning you could be locked up, or any threats to your body, meaning you could be physically harmed or tortured. Now, the UN has a convention against torture and other cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. So anything that falls under that definition would be considered persecution. The Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada also has on their website their definition of torture and different types or examples of torture. So you can feel free to look and see if what you're experiencing is listed there. But generally, torture is anything that causes severe physical or mental suffering that is intentionally inflicted. Okay, so we've gone through what under the Refugee Convention the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada would consider persecution. But another aspect of persecution is that it has to be systematic, meaning this is not just a one-time bad experience, but this is a negative experience that keeps on happening over and over again and is also likely to continue to keep happening as long as you are a member of this particular group. So this could be because you're stigmatized by society, the culture in your home country lends itself to this sort of human rights violation, or the state itself views you criminally, so it subjects you to persecution through its institutions. So here's a list of examples of persecution as listed on the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada's website. So there's torture, beatings, and rape. These are prime examples of persecution. Behavior, which includes acts of violence or death threats, forced or coerced sterilization or forced abortion, female circumcision, psychological violence, the administration of drugs in detention or psychiatric institutions, and the list goes on. So please check out the links I've put in the description. There's also something called cumulative discrimination, which is basically several repeated acts of prejudice, bigotry, or discrimination that you may experience because of your membership in a particular social group. These smaller acts of discrimination individually wouldn't qualify as persecution, but if you experience them with enough frequency, they can be considered persecution or the reason you might fare something worse. So examples of cumulative discrimination could be verbal abuse or insults, harassment, and if you're a woman, this could be sexual harassment, vandalism, threats, whether verbal or written, or leaving a symbol like a noose or something. So let's go ahead and look at the kinds of people that can face persecution. So ethnic minorities, persons with different sexual orientations, if you have a stigmatized illness such as HIV/AIDS or a mental illness, you could also face persecution. If you're a woman in a patriarchal society, such as what exists in certain Islamic theocracies in the Middle East, you may also face persecutions, such as the guardianship policy in Saudi Arabia, or forced marriage, honor killings, or female circumcision. You could face persecution if you profess a certain religion, especially in countries like Iran, where conversion to Christianity, I think, is legally punishable by death. You could also face persecution for your political views if you're a human rights activist or a journalist. The Immigration and Refugee Board website has a list of examples of people who face persecution, so you can check out the link in the description. So next, we're going to look at agents of persecution. Who are agents of persecution? This is really important because if you have no agent of persecution, you don't have a valid refugee claim. So first of all, according to refugee law, an agent of persecution must be human. It can't be a natural disaster like a tornado or a hurricane or an earthquake. International relief, aid, and protection comes into play for these kinds of emergencies, but not under the Refugee Convention. So your persecutor needs to be human. So let's look at some examples of agents of persecution. One type of persecutor could be the state or state authorities. For instance, if because of your membership in a political group, you're considered a terrorist, the state could lock you up. Or if you're living in Nigeria, where, for example, it's actually illegal to be a homosexual, the state could also lock you up. If you're a human rights advocate or journalist and the government doesn't like that, the state could also lock you up. So these are some great examples where the state is persecuting you. Now, another type of agent of persecution could be non-state authorities. This is when it's not the state itself, but it could be persons who have a lot of power and social influence and money. Perhaps they even have political connections. These persons have the ability and power to persecute you. So some examples of non-state authorities could be prominent members in the community, religious leaders, tribal chiefs. It could also be family members. Perhaps you're part of a large and wealthy family that has social influence and can hunt you down because of some issue they don't like. In the case of psychiatric abuse of the mentally ill, it could be a psychiatrist or a psychiatric institution because these also have a lot of social power and influence. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at in your claim is lack of state protection. So once you've established what the persecution was that you've experienced or who your persecutors are, you finally need to show that your home country is offering you no state protection. Meaning that, for instance, if you try to go to the police to get help, they might laugh at you or treat you disrespectfully, or they might even try to help your persecutor by turning you over to them. Okay, now if the persecutor is the state itself, meaning the government or police or security armed forces or some form of state authority, obviously you can't go to the state for protection since they're the ones persecuting you. However, if your persecutor is not a state authority, for example, let's say it's the leader of a gang or a powerful drug cartel, you're going to have to show that your country will still not offer you any protection from them and offers no legal recourse for you, meaning you can't even appeal to the courts or any kind of justice system. So you have to show that these persecutors can act with complete impunity, meaning they won't be punished or arrested or brought to justice, either because they have a lot of social power and influence, or the state does not consider what they're doing to be a crime. All right, so we've looked at your agent of persecution. We've looked at lack of state protection. Now, another thing we have to look at is establishing that you have no in-flight alternative. So what's an in-flight alternative? An in-flight alternative means that you could move to another part of the country and be safe from your persecutors. So you're going to have to show to the judge that there is nowhere in your country that you'd be safe. This could be challenging if you live in a fairly large country and your persecutor is not part of the state or government. For example, if your persecutor is a state, then there's nowhere safe for you in your home country because obviously the state is everywhere. If your persecutor is not the state, though, it's not the government, and you come from a large country, you're going to have to show that moving to another part of the country is still not an option for you. For example, let's say you did try to move to another part of the country and you were still experiencing threats from your persecutor. That's a good way of showing the judge that you're still not safe in another part of the country. Or let's say it's the head of a drug cartel that wants you dead. You could possibly show that this drug lord has several organized gang members throughout the country and he can find you wherever you go. So let's move on to the next element of your refugee claim, which is establishing a well-founded fear. So in order for your refugee claim to be successful, you have to show that your fears are well-founded, meaning this isn't something that figuratively might happen, or it's only happened once and is unlikely to happen again. And this is where your evidence comes in, where you can show human rights reports, news articles, and the testimonies of other witnesses to show that the situation you're facing in your home country is a very real danger. It also helps if you actually experienced this persecution before and you have evidence of that, like death threats, or maybe you even went to the police and filled out a report, but nothing was done about it. So that helps. But let's look at other things you can include to support your claim. Your evidence can include human rights reports about your home country that's specific to what you've experienced. You can get human rights reports or country conditions from organizations like the United Nations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, BBC World News, Freedom House, Ref World, and other organizations. You can also submit affidavits or witness testimonies from persons who've experienced similar persecution to what you're at risk of experiencing. Perhaps they might have even been granted refugee protection here in Canada or somewhere else. Their testimony could be very helpful. Another thing you could do to support your claim is to have an expert witness give testimony at your hearing. Perhaps they're a human rights advocate or specialist, and they have expert knowledge of the type of persecution you're experiencing in your home country. Or maybe they're a lawyer or a professional who often deals with the same issues you're facing. So all of these are things you can submit to the judge to help your claim. You can submit human rights reports and news articles, the testimony or affidavits of witnesses or similarly situated persons, and you could have an expert witness give testimony or an affidavit. All right, so we're going to summarize the 6 main things you have to provide to make a valid and successful refugee claim. 1, you have to show that you belong to a vulnerable or social group of some kind that experiences persecution in your country. 2, you have to show that what you've been experiencing is actually persecution. For example, threat to your life, threat to your freedom, or threats of physical harm to your person. And you have to show that this is systematic or repetitive due to the fact that you belong to a persecuted group. 3, you have to show who your persecutor is, or your agent of persecution, which has to be human and can be state or non-state authorities. 4, you have to show that your home country offers you no state protection. You've been to the police, nothing was done. 5, you have to show that you have no in-flight alternative. And 6, you have to show that your fears are well-founded. Actually, another thing I forgot to mention when it comes to showing a well-founded fear is if you've had family members or persons you know actually who have been killed, it shows that your fears are very real and very likely to happen. So let's look at some facts about the refugee process. So who determines if you're a convention refugee and what is the process? The Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada determines if you're a refugee. I'll share a link to a video you can watch to learn about their system. Here are some resources you can also use to help you through the process. There's the Ready Tour. This may have been changed due to COVID, but it used to be that the FCJ Refugee Center would offer a tour of the Immigration and Refugee Board's hearing room about once a month. So here's a contact for the FCJ Refugee Center so you can talk to them about the tour. Next, Matthew House offers a mock hearing program where they take you through a simulation of a refugee hearing. So it will really help you prepare for what to expect and how the judge may question you and things like that. So here's Matthew House's contact. And guess what? Once you have your refugee claimant status, you can apply for a work permit, you can apply for a study permit, you have health coverage through interim federal health, you can apply for childcare fee subsidy, and you can apply for Ontario Works or ODSP. Another important document, which is probably the most important document to your refugee claim, is your basis of claim narrative. This is where you'll tell the judge about all the horrible things you're going through in your home country and why you had to flee. Now, this video is getting a bit too long, so I think I might have to do a part 2 because there's a few things we need to look at in how to structure your basis of claim narrative and the essential parts of your story that you're gonna need to include. But finally, let's look at how you can get a refugee lawyer. So Legal Aid Ontario is a non-profit organization that provides funding for you to obtain legal counsel. There have been cuts made to legal aid, however, so I think it no longer covers your lawyer coming to your refugee hearing or even doing sessions with you to prepare for your hearing. You might get a nice lawyer who might be willing to do those things for you pro bono, meaning for free, but for now, just assume they don't. Anyway, here's some contacts for Legal Aid Ontario and how you can apply for a legal aid certificate to retain a refugee or immigration lawyer. So guys, I think I might have to do a part 2, but I hope this gives you a lot of information on what you'll need for your refugee hearing and how to make a successful refugee claim. Also, I've put a link in the description where you can download a handout that will have a lot of the information in this video. So you can click on the link in the description and download the handout. So till part 2, I'll see you next time, and God bless.